Hey, welcome to our October call. Of course, many of you know we're going to quarterly or special trainings as they come up. Before I kind of get started, this is actually because Kathy is on a schedule that we had to pre-record this call. So before we kind of get started with that and sharing her information that I thought was interesting in the context of a note deal that we worked over together, is there anything anyone wants to say or questions or David, this is reminding me that I didn't get back to you on that one deal on Bradford that I promised. I will look at that tomorrow and get back to you.
Okay, thank you.
So yeah, sorry about that.
No problem.
So anybody else have anything to say, questions to ask? Because I'm just going to play that pre-recorded video, and then if there's any questions, you guys can speak up or chat box. But anyway, so this this version of what I decided to make it about was there was a note that I was real excited to buy, and Kathy, who was on the West Coast and moved to the East Coast a number of years ago, said, back here in the East and in the South, we really have to look at deals differently. So kind of putting a different, and so we in this pre-recorded version, we talk about, what we how we went through this and how this deal played out. So I thought it was kind of instructional. I hope you guys find it valuable. Please, stop, ask questions or whatever. And otherwise, I just need to, if you guys can give me feedback if the sound, if there's any problem with the sound, because sometimes playing a video on GoToWebinar doesn't work the way I always think it's going to. So, all right, so here we go. Hey, welcome to the October session of the Owner Financing and Notes Club call. This month we have one of our own, Kathy Malcolm from Greenville, South Carolina. Did I say that right? Greenville, South Carolina. And she used to live in California, and I'll let her tell her story. But moving from West Coast to East Coast, or from the West to the South, she really brings a good perspective and something that I think a lot of us West Coasters sort of miss when evaluating real estate and notes in other parts of the country. And I think this is going to be a great case in point. And Kathy has been a long-time investor. I think you've been a professional too, right? At different points. You had a license.
Yes, I have.
Right. And now you're doing some teaching with your real estate investment club, very involved in that, and forming your own note group over there and helping people just get comfortable with the financial calculator and how to evaluate deals. So with that introduction, Kathy, would you just give us a little bit of a bio about you and kind of set the stage for the topic that we're going to talk about today is evaluating things in the different areas of the country, specifically the South, where, from our perspective, over here, prices look cheap, rents look high in regards to the, price of the house, blah, blah, blah. So if you can just take it, that would be great.
Well, I originally came, before I transferred to Greenville, I worked in the Silicon Valley and in the San Francisco Bay Area. And I was a I ran the finance department. And so numbers were always something that we always keyed into because we had different metrics that we had to report on monthly. So
Right.
In getting into real estate, it was the same thing for me because real estate has to earn some kind of value. And like you said, on the West Coast, it's a very big appreciation market. Normally you can buy something, but even if it negative cash flows for a while, you're banking on that market appreciation will take over and you'll make your money when you go and sell the property or you hold it long term, it will have some value for you. When I transferred to the south, that is a little different model. In the Greenville area, even though that has grown quite a bit since I've been here, it isn't a big cash flow generator. I mean, we generate just about what the norm is at about 4%, not any much more than that.
As a cap rate on real estate?
Yeah, as a look at a market value, I mean, we're kind of in an unusual period where we're growing quite a bit downtown, so we're getting developers coming in, which is pushing the market a little bit higher than what was here when I first got here. You could buy a property that would sit with negative price appreciation for 5 or 6 years. So you really have to bank on the cash flow as being what that value of the property brought. And so in doing that, I kind of changed my mindset a little bit and said, okay, if I can't bank on appreciation, then I really have to look at whether the cash flow will be there and my money is earning what I'd like it to earn. So I totally revamped how I looked at something. And it took me a while because, you can certainly find people that will give you a rosy picture on a property, but that doesn't mean that that's what you can sell it for. So, and that's how I got to that, looking at the property which you sent, because you see somebody saying, I'd like to sell it for X. Well, here you have to definitely validate that as close as you can to where the property is located. In South Carolina, if you're out one subdivision from another, that could have a totally different market value. So everybody's very driven to, on the same street in the same neighborhood, they try to comp something out because that gives them a better price than anything else. So they keep it very tight. And that's different when you're going to sell the property. You want the appraiser to go out, oh sure, go out 3 or 4 miles and get the best comp for me. But when you're buying, you look to the property. So with that mindset, when I looked at this, I did the same kind of thing. I stayed very close to where the property was located, or the properties, in this case, we had 5 to look at, and tried to evaluate not only the price, but what the cash flow might be. So that's how we kind of got to the place we are today.
Well, yeah, and just to back up and provide some backstory, because we jumped right into it. There was a guy that came to me. I guess he's been kind of revolving around the last 2 or 3 years. And he's a bus driver. He drives a school bus, and on the side, he's been just trying really hard to get into the note business and to do his first deal. Because when you're, it can take a long time. If you're just, you got your regular job and you're just cultivating leads on the side, it can be tough to just get your first deal under your belt. And this guy, he goes, oh, I think I finally have one. And we went back and forth and back and forth. It was this gal who, anyway, so part of me is super excited to help someone get their first deal because, it just gives me a lot of gratification, like watching one of your kids ride the bike for the first time. So I was really hoping that this would come through to him. For him. And so the way it was presented in the beginning was this lady who had, she's all right. I don't actually know where she was from. She has a pretty thick foreign accent, but she'd been in Georgia for a while, just apparently buying up a lot of property. And then she took 5 of them and sold them all together as a group. She sold the selling price. I don't know if this is big enough. The selling price was $200,000 for all 5 properties, 5 rental properties, single families, gross rents $36.75 a month. And for me, I'm going, well, wow, that's a lot of debt coverage. I mean, if I had that much debt coverage, I mean, that's it. Out here, like if I spent $200,000 and I had 0.1%, if I could rent for $2,000, I'd be real happy with that. And here he's got, almost close to double of that, happening on here. So in my first thing I'm looking at is like, wow, that looks pretty impressive. And you had a comment to that, didn't you?
I did.
You guys just bring that up right now. I mean, just because I said that, because like 1%, if we get that out here anywhere in my, in the West that I know of, like we're just real thrilled.
In the case here, it can be higher than that because you have lower values. You have properties here that we consider what they call rentals only, and they're rentals. And this particular portfolio sits in a lot of what I consider rental pockets.
Right.
And if that's the case, you really have to look at, again, it's individually, how much is that rent going to attribute to that market value? And so we don't quite do it like we do it on the West Coast, because anything that cash flows, we're happy with. I mean, that's great. But on the East Coast, especially in the South, that's the only value it does have. So in the case of looking at these, you look at them independently and you say, if they are at the market value that they seem to be, because I looked at them independently and then pulled up, unfortunately I have to use something like Zillow, which really may not be totally accurate,
right.
But you can at least see rental properties. And all the rental properties were in the same market value. So I thought, all right, so somebody's not going to pop from one property to another. More than likely you're going to keep that renter at least with lease time, that's leased.
Right.
But what I looked at in aggregate, when you add them up, and if any one of them goes vacant, he has a negative cash flow by the time he pays out his expenses, because he still has to pay taxes, he still has to pay insurance, he still has to cover what other expenses he may be covering. But minimally, that's 30%. And sometimes it takes as high as 50% on gross rents to be able to come up what the net will be.
Okay,
and none of those going vacant.
Okay, so I just want to make sure that I don't get lost and nobody else gets lost with me. But what you're saying is, well, let me recreate this note. The guy put down $50,000, which is 25%, which sounds pretty respectable. But Kathy, your point is that this was an inflated number over actual cash value. The only value is the rents, and if it's not rented and you had to dump it for quick, he's probably overpaid by quite a bit here, right?
Yeah.
I mean, 5 times, maybe as much as double what the cash value is, but they were rented and they're cash flowing. So, but in your market anyway, so technically, with 50,000 down, 200,000 down, minus 50,000, 25% down payment. That's respectable for an investor down payment. I go, okay, that's a lot of skin in the game right there. The other thing this lady said was that, and she just really kept embellishing things. And the more I talked to her, the more I started just not getting a little bit of an uneasy feeling, because every time she would say something really grand and dramatic, like, oh, well, he's a big real estate investor. He and his wife, they're these big real estate agents. She's got, she has $1 million listing. And like, okay, well, I went and researched, just doing, like, is she telling me the truth even? Let me just find out what I can Google on these guys. And sure enough, the wife, they were both, it's pretty interesting, actually. They had interesting lives. They were both professional trapeze artists. And they traveled, the world with, some organization. And then, but now that they're settled here in this town in Atlanta, they're starting a school, and yes, she has her real estate license, and she's got one really nice listing. That doesn't mean it's going to sell. And she had a couple other little listings, and he is not a real estate agent at all. It looks like he's just being a stay-at-home dad, and maybe, teaching some of these classes when they get people signed up, for trapeze sessions and things like that. So she really, really over exaggerated, would be the nicest way to say it, who they were and the depth of their experience and, that kind of a thing. So that starts to make me uncomfortable when someone's doing that. Then I wonder what else they're exaggerating. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And actually, in understanding the backstory too, makes me, as being a possible buyer of a portfolio like this, nervous because, again, if something happens where the cash flow doesn't meet what the expectations are, then that type of a couple could be in more trouble than someone has a lot of real estate that they can shuffle around.
Exactly.
And make some.
Yeah, like they could be hanging on by their eyelashes, so. But okay, so back to this $150,000 note. But what they did is she wanted to be guaranteed her interest. So they made this, and this is unusual. I don't usually see this. As an attorney put this together, and this was somehow the agreement. She wanted to be guaranteed her interest. So here's what they did on this: 7.9%, make zero feature value, 72 months. And what's the monthly payment? Okay, so then what they did is then take that payment, times it by 72, and say, what they did is 187.2. So what they did is that when they made the note, and so this is actually stacking benefits to the seller again. Number one, she sold for more than technically market value to a couple who's doesn't have deep experience in real estate. It didn't look like to me, like she had said. And then here, their $50,000 only got them. It didn't get them 50,000 in equity from here, theoretical equity. It only got them, what is that, $23,000 in equity. So it's like, wow, she really got it on both sides. They were really eager, it looks like to me. So basically what this note was, a 0% interest, but at this inflated price. And they were just paying $2,600 a month for the 72 months. So when you look at it amortizes. So, but then I thought to myself, well, because they're paying more and they don't have as much equity as I'd like them to, but still I'm thinking, let me pull up that amortization if I can find it. Yeah, but still it's amortizing super quickly. No, that was the investor one. Anyway, you can see that $2,600 a month is knocking down that principal balance pretty quick. So I liked that about it. The terms, nice and short. So, in not very long, what's 2,600 times 12? They're knocking off 31,000 a year on it. So, after 2 years, they'd be down basically at 100% loan to value at that point after a couple of years. Right, Kathy?
And that's part of it.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Right. So, anyway, so I thought that at first I really liked it because I thought, oh, if it's 2,000, it's not in my mind, 5 properties that are cash flowing this month to get much together. Yeah, to me, on the face value, that doesn't seem unreasonable. That's only, 40,000 a property, something like that seemed reasonable. This seemed like a good down payment. The amortization is quick. He had at this point when I got this, he'd already paid 6 payments, 66 left to go. He had a super high. They did have excellent credit. That was another good thing. And I don't know if they had family with money, but also Georgia is supposedly really easy to foreclose on, and that's supposed to be a positive. Do you have any comments about that?
No, I think you're right. I think that's a pretty easy versus like down someplace in Florida where it takes a lot longer. So,
South Carolina, what was it? How long is it taking in South Carolina these days?
It can be pretty long too because we're a judicial state, so it's got to go to the equity court.
Gotcha. Is it about a year or so?
Yeah, it can. Sometimes you can get, if you're right on top of it, you can get right to the attorney and get everything done, but you got to go through an attorney. And so it takes, I think it's just the timing of it. I have not had to do that, thank goodness. So I'm knock on wood, won't have to do that. But some, I guess, can go out over a year.
Yeah, yeah, and this is like 90 days-ish, I want to say.
Yeah.
I've had to start foreclosure a couple of times, but I haven't had to finish in Georgia. So fingers crossed. But anyway, so I'm thinking, gosh, even if you just, I'm going, okay, well, what if we just end up with all the properties? And I'm thinking, oh, you can get a manager and you can pretty much, keep the rent stable. Then I'm thinking 36, what did I say the rents are? 75
Yeah. Yeah.
times 12. And
Yeah.
you're gonna give me a schooling here in just a second. But so 44th, and then if the initial investment, what is it that was my purchase price, 115.6 divided by 115.6. Wow, as a rental, that looks like I'm going to make worst case scenario is going to make 38% a year, right?
Right. As long as those rents keep coming, you are.
Yeah, exactly. So your point in the South is that these kind of rentals and the kind of tenants that you get, there's a really high turnover. And so tell me more about your experience with an understanding of like the people that would rent. Give me a profile of these people and what's a likely scenario with them.
They usually work, again, jobs that in the fast food or very, in other words, there's not as much job security for them as there are for people that work in a manufacturing plant or something like that. And there are some of those, but they're going to go normally to the properties that we call our bread and butter here. That's somewhere between the 90 to the 150 range. That's the kind of rental they want. And so that when you look at what we consider the lower rents or the values of these properties independently, then you know it's probably the lower income people that are going to fill that. And that could be Section 8. That could be people that are working very, like fast food kind of jobs. So it takes two incomes, one income to them, and they can't afford the rent. They're good people. They want to do the right thing, but it just happens. So I look at the value of the property of who it's going to attract, and these happen to all fit into the lower income value. And so that again makes you a little bit more nervous because when they can't pay, they leave, and they don't send you a letter, they don't notify you, they don't call you and say, "I'm not going to pay you next month." They just leave, and then all of a sudden your rent's not there, and you go, "What happened to my rent?" And you find out, well, they've left.
Right.
And usually, unfortunately, sometimes in those kinds of rentals, you go in and you have a lot of repair that you have to do because they sometimes don't leave it in the best condition when they walk out that next day.
Right, right. And so then back to what you were saying before, and I don't know if this is a good time to bring up the form. You said,
can.
Yeah. So, wonder if I can just get this a little bit bigger. So you were using this as an example to bring to your group and crunch these around and say, and I'm, from my perspective, it had a lot of strengths until my BPOs came back in. And then my relationship with her I started feeling uneasy because I was feeling like she wasn't telling me. She was exaggerating. She was being a used car salesman. She was, overestimating, the strengths, overstating the strengths, understating the risks. And then to top it all off, and this is about the same time my value came back around. And to top it off, I found somebody else say, "Hey, I got this note for you." And she was still, even though we were under contract, she was still actively shopping it around. So she had no sort of sense of, "Hey, we have a deal going here. I'm spending money on my due diligence." And so I'm like, this is not the kind of person, I mean, for those two reasons, it's like, yeah, yuck. I don't get a good feeling about this.
But would assume that if everything was what she originally had stated, that the value of the properties really did add up to 200,000 or more, then she would stay through the process because she knows that you're going to find all good things that are happening. It's all working, and there's no reason for her to shop around if she has a tentative buyer that she's working with. So, yeah.
So she had no integrity there at all, which is what I really hate about the note business in some ways, it's like there's just so many, the fact that I can be working on a deal and then get someone submitting a deal to me that I'm already working on, I was like, oh, nice. Sometimes you end up seeing the deal from like 2 or 3 different people, and when you send out, just this is a point to make, when you are trying to shop a note around, it's so much better if you don't post it on a big site, if you don't send it to everyone and their dog, because then it gets sent around, and actually it's a surprisingly small community. You can end up running into the same people, or and if I know a note's being shopped all over the place, I'm not that motivated to work on it, because I probably don't have control over that deal. Probably the person who brought me the deal doesn't have control over it. It's a big epic waste of time. So in general, it's better to develop relationships with 2 or possibly 3, sources, and just stick with those, and do not ever put it up on Loan MLS, on FCI Exchange. I mean, you'll just get inundated, and it's just like, never mind, just shoot me in the foot now. Anyhow, that's just a pet peeve and kind of how the industry works in a way. But all right, so back to this. You got this down. 26.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. First name due. All right. So then what did you do here? Talk to me about your.
And then I looked at the locations of the properties, knowing that I had to look at whether rents were reasonable or if they were, high or low. So could I raise rent?
So do you use the rentometer that a lot? I mean, I've started to use that quite a bit.
I have. There are certain pockets like Atlanta's perfect for that. Yes, you can use that. But in Greenville, not so much. Again, and more information is being populated to it, so it's getting more accurate. But in this case, I think I just Googled the addresses and were able to pull up HotPads, which is another thing that aggregates rents, and so I could look at rents real close to these properties and say, yeah, they were approximately what you had down there was right. Approximately the rent for the area. So I say, okay, that's a given. That $3,600 is fine, but that $3,600 also has some expenses that have to come out of it, and that's where the next thing I go. So when I teach my class, I said there's a quick and dirty way you can look at it. You can say, my rent expense runs 50%. Well, that to me is my worst category.
Yeah.
My best category is it runs 30%, and so that's fine too. So I usually kind of do best and worst and say, if this is all good, and that's where I came up where.
Are these expenses? Sorry, are they including your vacancies?
Yeah, it should include vacancy. Right. It should include your property taxes. If you have property management, some kind of profit, some kind of reserve. It includes all those expenses. Yeah.
So what did you pick on this? And did you indicate it here on this form?
The worst case to me is 50%.
Okay, so annual rent, you could see what they were getting on each one, and you said, okay, so that means what your is this annual rent? Okay.
Based on gross. Yeah.
Okay, based on the gross, then we pop over to here. So basically, best case, so you're taking this times 12, 44 times, if we say likely, it would be 40%.
Yeah, so you take it times your 60.
Yes, so if you get to keep 60% of it, right. That's where we got that number. Okay, right.
Correct.
So yeah, that's one thing that people often, don't count at all. And then I was thinking, also divided by 12, and you had this over here, I think 2205. So 2205, and there you go. That's $400 less than his mortgage payment right now. So even this is basically like a negative play for them, but like super quick amortization. like in 6 years, if they can hang out 5 more years, they're going to own it free and clear. But in the meantime, it's a little wonky. After you say, hey, 40% expected, 40% expenses and vacancies and all that, it's high turnover, lots of repairs, management fees, blah, 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 for me, right? Not being there to have to hire a manager. So that's where you came up with, yeah, no, this looks negative. Like if they would have had a lower monthly payment, it would have been better, because then that even if they have a bad, string of vacancies, that they can still make the mortgage payment just from not having to subsidize with their income.
Yeah, and that's what I want to know, that person that's paying on the note, even though, like you said, they had a good credit score, but you want to know a lot more about them. Like, is this the only investment, or do they have other resources? Because they need to dip in their pocket each and every year to cover this, or each and every month, if
Right.
anything. Yeah, even with it being rented without a vacancy kind of a thing, they could be in trouble if something happens. So,
Right.
because even if you flip to the best case, just saying taxes and interest without going to vacancy, maybe,
Right.
that's at 25.7 too. So it was, I mean, they'd have to be stellar. They'd have to be so well prepared. I mean, so
They have to have a lot of reserve.
Yeah, exactly, to be able to run this portfolio.
Right. And you were saying that a lot of, well, all right, let's drop that for a second.
Okay.
So let's go back so what you started to do was you figured the rents, are these likely, and then you figured the actual NOI, right? Net up after expenses. And what happens, can they, in the worst case scenario, or even if it would have cash flowed at this number, I could have felt a lot better about it. But like it fell apart for me before that for other reasons. But I didn't actually make a sheet like this. It's very cool. And then you went to property values, and
Yep.
so then, and you made up some of these, and do you want to tell? Did you go to Zillow first, or do you have a? Is this a subscription service?
Yeah,
Okay.
it's a script service that we use, and the reason I got this particular one was because I can do nationwide comps on it. And that's important to me because, again, I come out of California and I have property in California, I have property in South Carolina, I have property in North Carolina. So I wanted to be able, I didn't want it to be regionally, locked into an area. And Black Knight is actually, was bought over, it used to be Sidex, and so that was the particular service it was. And it was recommended by a title company when I was back on the West Coast. And so I just kept the service, and I just used it ever since then.
Now, how does this relate? How does this relate to this? Because here's the site here's what I'm using, RealQuest, CoreLogic's RealQuest.
Yeah.
How do they compare? Black Knight.
I think they compare property. Yeah, I think they're comparable because they pull from the county data and they pull the same comps, as soon as they're registered, they just pull down the data. So I think it's very comparable to that service also. I've just I'm used to knowing how to select my comps because I've used it so long. So, it's who you're familiar with. And so I think, but the data's exactly.
Yeah, okay. And what does it cost to have access to this service?
Well, they tell me that I got a grandfathered rate, so I pay about $100 a month for it.
Wow, that's a good price. I think you're getting half.
It is.
I think you're about half of what it should be, at least.
Yeah, I've had it for years, so and I don't do any changes to it because I keep that low rate.
Yeah. Okay, well that's good. So you went there, and then you also just went to Zillow.
Yeah, and the reason I do that is because I kind of look at, just to be able to see what the property looks like. And in Sidex, you just get data. You don't get pictures of the property. So,
this picture that you put together, did you put that in from Zillow?
Yeah, I just do that so that when I go back and look at a report, I go, oh yeah, that's right. That's the house I looked at.
Right.
So,
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, what else are you looking for when you're on Zillow besides just pictures and just a basic sense for it, and the numbers they pop out that are meaningful or not generally?
Well, I sometimes, and because I know that it's so important to be in a close proximity to get the right market value,
Mm-hmm.
I'll look at, because you can get that population by market in the little Zillow map. You can, and you can see, yeah, those market values are about the same. This house is no different than the house right across the street or down the block. And so you can see what comps are within that region that you want to look at. And so that's kind of what I use Zillow for. I don't use it so much for what it considers the market value to be, because again, it pulls from a larger area.
Right, the Black Knight. Right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and in Black Knight, you can actually go through and pick your comps. So you can say, this comp isn't really equivalent house. So again, it'll pull, it'll pull very similar to what all services do, and then you just go in and select the ones. In this case, for something like this, I didn't do any of that selection. I just let it say, what were the things sold in the last year? Mm-hmm. So I didn't do any pre-selection. And that's how I started coming up with the square footage price. And that's what I use to see whether the values that were shown here on the note was the value of the home today.
Right.
And that's,
so if we start there, just on Zillow, we've got, it was sold for $40,000, which we know, and the reason it was sold at a premium is, I'm assuming, because of the financing. Someone could come in without all cash and without having to get a loan. And because this lady was probably a really good salesperson and very stubborn about getting her price. But this estimate here is $36,000, and it looks like it's based upon, I mean, like you said, these numbers look pretty solid. But then when you pulled up your Black Knight stuff, you get the deal. Yes, that's the guy that owned it. Eliza Kadish. All right, so the assessment.
And then you get to look at the subject. So here you get the market value of what it's seeing, the land and the property, and then you get to look at the properties that are around it. Now this is the actual property itself you're looking at and how it changed within that person. So there was so it's a transfer between families, so that doesn't show up as a real market value. Right. And as you go down, prior transactions still more. So there's a history to this that's been.
Back in 2007, looks like they bought it as a foreclosure.
Correct.
So she probably has like a fraction of money. She probably got it for $5,000 or $10,000 or something.
Right.
She did well.
And then and then in 07, we all know that in 07 things were pricing a little bit higher. So there's that 56.5. So that doesn't. So I see nothing necessarily in line. It's just that you can see there's a lot of buying and selling of particular property over time. That's all. And you can see
I think these are Walter would call these trading sardines, not eating sardines.
Yes. Exactly. Very true.
So where's
rental properties? Okay.
Go
ahead. So then you look at, now you can start seeing other addresses that are close, and you can see where you can go up again. You're going down, but yeah. And there are actually 3 comps that sold in the last year, so we're looking at number 3 there. It sold, and I pulled up what the square footage rates are so that you can compare apples to apples. Because this particular house is at 1150, and I think when we're looking at is at 816. So you can't take what it sold for, or you can take the square footage rate.
Yeah.
Right. And so I averaged all the square footage, what I could find, I averaged that, and that came out in this particular property at $17 a square foot. And then I times the 832 that was on it. And so if this person had to sell it today, based on that square footage rate, it's at $14.4, not at the price he paid for it. See, it's the second property down on line 25. You can see it's 830, and that's 17.7 is an average, and it's 14.4.
Right. So Oops.
And that's how things are looked at here. They're quite often, when you look at how the rental properties are looked at, somebody will pull and average up the square footage rates and times them out times the current square footage and say, if I had to sell it quick, I should be able to get 14.4, which is way below the value that was stated on the contract.
So, so the guy paid, if it's worth 142.6, so even just call it 150. He paid $50,000 more, plus really $27,000 more. So he really paid $77,000 more, $87,000 more because of the way the financing was. I mean, yes, he got financing, but he paid a pretty high premium for it. I mean, he paid even just one of those would have been fair, but she got she got greedy on both sides, and then she didn't want to take a discount on her note, so it's like, yeah. Does that, right? Are you following what I'm saying there?
Yeah, absolutely. So what you're looking like I look at, what can I make on it while I'm holding it, which has got to be the payment that is on the note. That's one. And then if something happens to it, I don't want property in Atlanta either. I don't live there, so I would have to sell it. So do I make it up there? And in both cases, it looks pretty skimpy on both sides. So she made a great deal when she sold it, if she could find someone that would take the note as the way she was explaining it. But it certainly is more risky for the note purchaser if they didn't go through some kind of analysis.
Right. So just to bring numbers to this, if the true cash value quick sale is 142.6, and sometimes I don't always stick hardcore to this because lots of times. In some areas, right, the seller finance price is 4 times the cash price easily.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Right. So it depends on what your exit. If you have to sell for cash quickly, but if you know you're going to owner finance, you can count on some of these areas and getting quite a bit more, or keeping as a rental, I guess. But look, for cash value, he paid $57,000 more, and he really, should have had a loan for $150 left. But instead, it was 187 too. So what's the difference there? So there's 37,000 plus 57,000. I think they must have been really eager or not very experienced, because that's even more than I thought. They paid almost $100,000 more for the financing. The financing wasn't that attractive because they have to pay it off so fast. If they would have got longer terms and say maybe had $1,000 or $1,500 a month payment, that would have made a lot more sense. So
because then you could think that they stayed rented in the one side, even though you would not assume you have to fast sell them because you have rental coming in. So,
right. And the thing is, when you're buying, if you're making a loan, you can do all this, make all these requests of the borrowers. But when you're buying a note on the secondary market, I really don't have any right to go and demand information from the payer. If she didn't collect it, which she didn't, she made all sorts of grand claims, but she didn't have anything. She did run their credit. She made grand claims, but she didn't have anything to back up, so I would have to know that they have a substantial net worth before I would go, yes. But then Kathy came down here and says, here's the purchase price I was at. That's what I was under contract at, 115.6. And so the investment to value, divided by, if we pretend like it really was worth 200, well, that looks pretty respectable, right? Less than 60%. But then by the time you do the real analysis of what the cash value is, which is the most conservative way to do it, like I said, you can sort of give some some upside for financed. I think this is your number. Yeah. Now we're at 80. That's way above my comfort level. Right. So this is great. Should be very educational to people. Monthly payment number. So, all right. So then what did like when you were going over this with your people, did they have any comments, your little group that you've started there in South Carolina?
Well, again, they were looking at, again, the first thing they would look at, okay, well, if I can get in there and I can earn X amount on my money, then that might be attractive. But when we went through the breakdown, I've gotten pretty well trained to minimally take, 70% of that, minimally say their expenses are running 30. But most cases, that likely, when we went at 40, 60, is most, if I ask my room of landlords in my club,
Right.
what is your expenses running a month, they'll say 40%.
Yeah.
And so quite often I get them real trained to say, take gross rents, take times 60%. What is your net going to take on this property?
And
then calculate there.
Coverage ratio, right? I mean,
yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
And so they don't get caught up with just what this person might have gotten caught up into of saying, okay, this looks good, this looks good. Well, it doesn't look good by the time the expenses have to come out. So, don't get caught up in the numbers and the hype. Really run your numbers so that you can understand whether you have enough reserve. Because like you said, when we sit on the West Coast, that may still be what we buy because the rents just don't cover the same thing. But we know we're in a negative cash flow position. I don't think this guy has any. I would say he probably does not know until he has to pay the taxes and insurance at the end of the year.
Right. Yeah, right. I mean, to me, if he wouldn't have had to have an artificially $37,000 higher note balance, and he could amortize as quickly, over the 60 or 5.5 years left on the note, if he was paying this, then he's amortizing so quickly that here's my ammo, that starts to make me feel like, just even a year later, what would be next summer? He'd be down to 133. I mean, pretty much if he could just hang on 2 years, he'd be at about 100. And by then a ton of emotional and hard equity in it. So that's one thing I really liked about it, is because of the massive pay down of principal, and increase every month, over $2,000 going to increasing the protective equity on there. But, at the stage that she was trying to sell it and then, making it so he had to pay so much more for the property, I wonder if he really realized what he was doing there. Because, it doesn't even make sense to pay it off early. So this isn't a note that I go, oh, maybe he'll pay it off early. No, why would he? He's already paying. He's got 0% interest, and he's already paid his interest on this thing. It was already, like a gigantic prepayment penalty that he had to, work in there. But anyhow, well, is there anything that we haven't covered that you thought would be instructive?
No, I think we covered it all. I think that the message to me and to my group is to try to do, as much as you can up front to structure notes properly. Like you said, you don't know necessarily whether the person that structured the note really understood either that the values weren't there, or were they taking advantage of somebody that was inexperienced. You don't know that story, but
right.
I'm hoping that it wasn't the latter, because you hate to see someone go under for something that could produce, income for them and let them be an investor also. Because I do think in this world, we need people that will take on that kind of a risk and provide housing. And that's what we're all here for.
Right. Right. Yeah. Well, very good. Well, thanks again, Kathy. I did keep you longer than I promised, so I'm sorry about that. But I think this has been an incredibly helpful conversation, to me, and I'm really trusting it will be helpful to others as well. So I really appreciate you being generous with your experience and knowledge. And so thanks a lot.
You're welcome.
All right. Take care. Have a good day, Kathy.
You too. Bye.
Bye. Okay, so now I'm going to open the lines back up. I hope that was helpful. Are there any questions, comments, anything else come up that anyone wants to talk about?
Dawn, I've got a question on the players that were
Yeah,
involved in this note.
yeah,
Uh, there was mention of the trapeze artists.
right.
Okay,
Uh-huh.
who were they in this scenario? Were
They
they
were
the
they bought
persons that
the
were trying to
property.
buy them? They
Yeah, they
bought the
were they were the borrowers.
okay.
So they're the ones that put the 50,000 down and were paying on the
Hmm.
note.
The trapeze people. Oh, I thought they were selling it to somebody else.
No, the lady that the note holder sold it to them, and then she was trying to sell me the note. And then she was saying, "Oh, these are big time real estate agents and investors," and so, but that's not exactly who they were. I, okay. Anything else? Okay.
It
Well, if
was,
you go ahead.
it was really fascinating. It shows you how some people will really try to take advantage of people.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't really realize, put that all together until I was into it a bit, going, wow, she really, I mean, I guess I got to hand it to her. She navigated, but I do think it was on an unfair basis. And then she and her attorney were just so offended at the idea of taking any sort of discount at all. And I'm going, what are you guys smoking? And so, I ended up dropping my offer to 90, less than 100, I think 97,000, because that would have given me wiggle room to work with the borrowers if something went wrong, right? I could have restructured it and still maintained a very nice yield. And I just didn't want the exposure. So,
Sure,
uh,
you could have helped them and kept
right,
yourself in exposure in good shape. And like you
right.
said, at face value, you looked at this at first and you go, wow. And then when you really start looking at it, boy, somebody was really, really working this thing hard.
Right, right. And then, I mean, but don't you agree? I mean, wouldn't you think that if you bought a property in our part of the country, if we bought a property for 200,000, pretend it's not five properties, just even one, and it cash flow 3,600 plus, it doesn't even matter what your expenses are, you would still consider that a really smoking deal,
Oh
right?
yeah, you'd be doing backflips on that deal in
Ex-
California.
exactly. And even here in Reno, I mean, the it's gotten pretty tight where the cap rates that you have to accept, to be a player have gotten lower. There's a lot more pressure on it. Unless you're going to small, less desirable sorts of collateral, like obviously this note was secured by trading sardines, not eating sardines. It's just, you use it up in, while someone can pay, and maybe you get 11 months out of 12 or 10 months out of 12 rent on these things because of the high turnover and the high expenses or whatever. But I don't know. I just thought it was really interesting, and I appreciated her insight because they expect to, I said, well, and this didn't come up in the interview, but I said, what would you guys have considered really strong cash flow? What do you guys are expecting? He said, in the South, we would expect the rents to be two and a half to three times what you paid for the property. So they're going, yeah, I thought, oh, this is sounding pretty good. And they're like, nah, that's about half what we'd want it to be. So it was just a
I
really,
love Dawn, the gal you were interviewing. I can't remember her first name, but I
Kathy.
loved the way she structured how she showed everything. She's my kind of person that it's just so organized that I just loved her presentation of what she did to find all the values and her working out three scenarios for each thing. This is exactly what I would have done
Right.
if I would
And
have.
I don't think she would mind. If you want, I can put in her Excel spreadsheet. But yeah, I loved it. She goes, "Are the rents right? Because if the rents are too high, then they're likely to have more vacancy." She goes, "Nope, rents are in line. Then okay, values are in line, but then we got to go and check, price per square foot."
Right.
So yeah, I really loved how she did it too. For a different reason, like I'll probably use something like this, but for me, the deal fell apart for other reasons before I got
Right.
to this.
Right,
But
but
I,
this is just excellent to keep in mind that to run these different scenarios on your thing, because you could have something that would run a 50% expense, and you wouldn't want to be caught unawares that if that happened, would you still be okay? Or do you have enough reserves somewhere if that happened to happen on one property that you could cover that for a little while because the rest of everything.
Yeah,
Okay.
basically, if you were looking at their income statement or their net worth profile, you'd want to see that they could cover a negative for the next 5 years, right? I mean,
Right. Right. And maybe if they had, we don't know, because like you said, she was privy to whatever information that she wanted up front, but we can't ask them at this point. But
right.
maybe they did have a plan. Maybe this was something, they had an income coming from something else that they were putting towards this, and figured in 6 years we'd be free and clear, and then whatever happened, we'd be okay. So we don't know that part of the story, but
Right, like if she could have collected like proof of other
right.
things, but then she had all these magnificent things to say, but she had no backup when it came down, and so it's like you have to look at it a lot more conservatively.
Right.
I'm not the one that made the deal, so if you're going to make the deal and you underwrote it and you felt good about it, then great. You can either discount it and help me out, or I told her you can keep a remainder interest, and so that you can hold some of the risk with me. You're the one that put it together. You want your price, well then be willing to hold on to some of the risk, and she didn't want that at all.
Yeah,
So
so that kind of makes you a little, yeah, there was a bunch of red flags on this.
right. Right, but anyway, well, thank you so much for spending the time, and if you want, I will forward this to you, Chris, and if anyone thinks of something later, just email me about it. But anyway, always appreciate you guys so much, and until next time, you guys have a nice evening.
All right,
Thank you,
good night.
All
Don.
right,
Thank
all
you.
right,
Thank
bye
you, Don.
bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.